She was the first white woman to really claim these things publicly, to talk about the pathology of racism.
She is a radical, nuanced, incredibly unprecedented white voice in American history.
She understood that it was a stunted society because of race.
In my opinion, she was Jane the Baptist. She came early.
It was just great to see her named in King's letter that he wrote in a Birmingham jail, only because King was very critical of moderate whites. He was also very critical of liberal whites.
She was persecuted, she was oppressed, she was threatened, but she never backed down.
She wanted change. She was ready to go right along with the young people, like change now.
So as a white woman, Lillian Smith is examining what it means to be raised within a context in the South under white supremacy. Her work, Strange Fruit or Killers of the Dream, is a disagreeable mirror that it holds up to white America. And it's then hard for white America to see itself. And that takes not only brilliance and insight, but that also takes courage to be able to articulate whiteness in this form.
It was reassuring for young college kids like me to know that there were white people who were willing to go against the tide and articulate that the blessings of liberty, justice, and freedom ought to cover people of color too. There weren't that many white people who were reinforcing our views. They were on the other side. Get back, stand back, what have you.
When I read her now, it could have been written yesterday. So I think part of her would say that's still going on,
She just absorbed every experience she had and learned from everything and applied it to her own life and her own philosophy.
And what has happened in the South that has disturbed me so. Strange Fruit disturbed them, but they read it. They all read it. And then came Killers of the Dream, which deeply disturbed them. And they tried not to read that. Now, since then, I have gradually and slowly been accepted. And now I am the sweet little lady who has done so much about race relations, and we don't have to read her books at all because they aren't even interesting. Now, that is an acceptance I call death, you see, death to the writer. Death comes to the writer when people stop reading her books.
Lillian Smith is a great, I think a very great, heroic, and very lonely figure. She's paid a tremendous price for trying to do what she thinks is right. And the price is terribly, terribly high.
One thing that I would like to say before we talk, and I'd really like to hear people's comments and questions, but the Emory connection on this is so strong. When I hear Brenda's voice come through, Brenda Bynum, who I talked with early on about this, and because I knew about the one-woman play that she had been performing for about 4 years. Her energy, once I sat down, and I think our conversation lasted about 3 hours, it was like, oh my God, I've got most of the documentary here. And then I'm talking to 12, 15 other people. And I'm finally able to talk with George Yancey in the philosophy department. And he crystallized so much of what Lillian Smith was saying, what she was living, why her words are so important today, that I just felt blessed in a way that it all came together like that. And, and I had spent so many years at Emory working with great people. And I got a shout out to Rosemary McGee, who was my boss for about 10 years, who led me into all sorts of creative projects, including the Center for Creativity and Arts that I got to help with. But she's the one who kind of steered me into this direction as well. She was behind the Mary Hambidge documentary that we did. She had written an article about it. So other people did the research. Other people came in and shared their insights, and all I did was record their conversations And with the help of my son, Henry, who I don't know if he's joined us or not. Is he here?
Yeah,
he's here.
Yay, Henry. Henry brought the visual and the musical and the editing and the drone footage. He brought a lyricism to the project that we wanted to have. We wanted to share the beauty of the South as well as the terrible things that were going on in the South. And Henry was really instrumental in doing that. Maybe, Henry, maybe you'd like to say something about your involvement with the project too before we get going.
Yeah, just nice to be here. On this conversation, and I'm looking forward to people's thoughts and questions, but also, yeah, just to add to all that, to be able to work on something like this has learned a lot, and yeah, to be able to kind of help craft the film, and to be able to add stuff like the music and the footage of the landscapes Lillian lived in, meant a lot, and yeah, looking forward to answering any questions folks have today.
And I'm reminded, just seeing Henry, that we really wanted to pitch this to a younger audience. We wanted to energize and galvanize people, and we wanted to show her as a role model, as a hero for the times we're going through, to students. So there's a certain energy that we added to this in order to get their attention. Some people will say, well, you could have slowed it down more. We didn't have enough time to read things. And we're saying, well, the young people, they got it. They read it real fast. And that's who we're trying to really reach with the music and everything else. And we've shown it to audiences. We had about 15 screenings before things shut down. And I think we were feeling the energy from both sides. Of the young college students, we showed it at the Oxford campus, and it was great. And then we showed it in Lillian's hometown. We showed it in Portland, Oregon, Washington, D.C. And people are just surprised. And the thing we hear is, why didn't I ever hear about her before? Why don't I know about her? So it's nice to be able to think that we're filling in this little gap, an important gap, I think, in Southern history. And Brenda, you're here. Brenda, can you say something about your involvement and your work with Lillian?
Well, I'll be happy to. I think I love the idea that you thought of young people getting this information, getting this news, because I guess everybody who's watching you right now on this particular moment, we all were born on the other side of what has happened in our country, and we have lived through so much of what Lillian was in the front ranks of. And my first involvement with Lillian Smith was and you saw her niece, Nancy Fichter, on here earlier. She's the one who asked me to do something with Lillian Smith's letters, to do just a one-time reading that they could use to generate more publicity for the Residential Arts Center, which is up in the campus of Laurel Falls, the camp that Lillian's family had for so long up around Clayton. And I knew about Lillian Smith, but a lot of it was growing up. I knew I wasn't supposed to read Strange Fruit. That was sort of the big thing. I mean, oh no, young ladies don't read that book. And I knew little about her. I had not really known enough. And when I went up there and talked to her niece and started looking at the materials that she provided to me, I was set on fire with her life and decided that it wasn't just reading letters, that I had to bring her voice back as much as I could and let her speak again. Let her stand up and tell her story again to people who had not heard it or had been told they shouldn't hear it. And when Hal came along and wanted to do this documentary, oh my gosh, it just felt like every minute I had spent working on her letting her voice cry in the wilderness. Now here was a chance for it to really come out and be heard. And it's just been an enormous privilege to be involved in the work on this documentary. It's a gorgeous thing. And like Hal, the thing that has meant the most to me in all this time, both doing the play and being around for the showings of the film, are the number of people who said, "Thank you, I didn't know. I didn't know about her. I didn't know what she did. I didn't know who she was." And the gratitude that people have for now knowing, that's just the gift that Hal and Henry have given us with this documentary is priceless, absolutely priceless.
Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. I just want to point out I've been joined by my executive producer, Alicia Jacobs, and we share a house and family together too, but could not have done it without her. She read everything and talked to most of the people that I talked to. So, and I should have included you earlier, sorry. So can we take some questions or comments or whatever is on people's minds about this?
Well, I'll throw this in. I have been appointed the keeper of the list of raised hands because Hal doesn't want to fool with that, and I don't blame him. So if you will please raise your hand, I will call on you, and then Hal will take over from there. And the first hand I see is the estimable Henry Kahn.
I thought the film was wonderful, and I thought that Brenda's one-woman show could have been a one-universe show that I had the privilege to see a few years ago up in Raven Gap. It was just phenomenal, and I, who should have known better, didn't know hardly anything about this remarkable woman. But since both of you have put an emphasis on getting through to the youth, which I would like to believe is very important, I do believe it, it occurs to me that the erasure of people like Lillian Smith has something to do with the anti-communism that was aflame during the 20s, 30s, 40s, and certainly the 50s in this country. And I strongly suspect that there was nothing in Lillian's background that made her a communist explicitly, but she probably became an indirect victim of anti-communism because anybody who wanted to taint her could easily do that by putting the big C or S for socialist or something name around her and thereby minimize her importance. Does anybody know if she actually had played a role in some of the issues in which the Communist Party did also in Georgia in that era? There was the Angelo Herndon case in the 30s, in which Angelo Herndon, who was a communist, was indicted for sedition and nearly killed, but mounted an international campaign in his defense. The Scottsboro Boys, who were from Alabama, were featured by the Communist Party in that period. And Robin D.G. Kelly, who was briefly an Emory professor back in the 70s or 80s, has written extensively about the importance of the communist agitators in the Southern Black liberation movement almost a century ago. Where did Lillian Smith fit into that? Or is she just a tangential victim of the hostility to imagined things that the communists did to destroy the planet?
Interestingly, she's been criticized for being so anti-communist that it may have tainted some of her thinkings. She was involved with the SNCC movement in the 1960s, and she a few years later thought it was becoming infiltrated by communists. Started warning everyone to distance themselves. I think she was very concerned about James Foreman, for example. She distanced herself from the Highlanders because she felt like there was a communist thinking or people involved that were going to move them closer towards communism. she even pitched some of her arguments about the South against the segregationists was that it would make communism more appealing to blacks if they did not solve their problems in the South. And she would use that argument repeatedly in some of her writings. The FBI compiled a big file on her, because she had a friendship with Eleanor Roosevelt, and then they didn't find any connection with her in the communist movement. So that
Eleanor, a well-known communist, right?
Right. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting that she disliked communism so much because she felt like it indoctrinated people the same way that white supremacy indoctrinated people into thinking a certain way.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Gretchen, you have a hand up.
Yes, hi. Well, on the one hand, I certainly found the film, and I think, again, everyone I've spoken to has found it, just wonderfully complete, wonderfully whole at 50 minutes or 53 minutes, whatever it is. On the other hand, I could so easily have sat there for another hour or more. I mean, in a way, it's such a tease. I'm so glad you provided us with a bibliography, and we'll be reminding people of things that are available to read, including, of course, her own work in the newsletter article. But what I'm wondering, I suspect, and I'm glad you got your editor there with you, Hal, I suspect that you ended up with all sorts of wonderful material that just didn't fit in what you've got as it is. I'm just wondering if you've got a cache of, all kinds of great interview stuff. And Henry, I thought you must have had such a hard time deciding on the visual imagery and the music, and there's so much that could work. So do you have a whole lot of other stuff that you might do something with someday?
Yeah, we do. That's the hard part, is distilling, I don't know, 100 hours of footage into 50 minutes. We didn't want to slow it down and give all the historical context that maybe some people would like, but we just felt like we needed to tell her story, focus on her, and not the breadth of everything that was going on, hoping that people either know that or they'll be led to learn that on their own. Now, I'll give you an example. We did an hour or two interview with a member of SNCC. Her name is Jane Stembridge. And she had a very complicated relationship with Lillian Smith. She was a young gay woman. She wanted to talk to Lillian Smith about personal things that Lillian Smith didn't want to talk about. And she felt that Lillian Smith wanted to lecture her and tell her what to do without looking at her as, a full human being. It was a very complicated, very informative, very revealing kind of thing, but we couldn't use it in this documentary. But we're making it available to educators as a resource so that they can go back and see more about what was involved with Lillian Smith's connection with younger people at the time. And but there are other things like that, long interviews with other people, with the editor of the UGA Reader that came out in 2016, Rose Gladney. It's pretty much devoted her academic career to Lillian Smith. So you can imagine, a 3 or 4 hour conversation with her. It got very deep at times. And again, we're only using snippets. So yeah, I'd like to be able to compile this and use and make this available someday to educators.
Well, and be sure and include some of that wonderful imagery, the landscape, the river, the fog, the mountain, and the music.
I have to give Henry credit for putting the drone up over the Jasper water tower, and when the buzzards were.
The birds, yeah, that was amazing. Yeah,
gorgeous, yeah. Well, I see another hand up, Rosemary McGee.
Hal, as you mentioned, I've had the pleasure and privilege of watching this work of yours unfold, and seeing different versions actually of the documentary and seeing it in person several times. And I'm wondering, what are some of the most interesting questions or feedback that you've received, either positive or questioning, or the work and her work?
Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I know that one question that often comes up, and in reference to the last question, as far as what things had to get left out, a lot of people want to know more about the camp and about the, the stories of the young women, and how they went back into the world after being at the camp and having such a, open look at the world, and then having to go back into their homes in the South. And that's something we've always heard people who would like to know more about that, and just especially their curiosity about the way that Lillian really sort of refined her thinking and her writing and her ideas about the world through working with young women. And
yeah, and that's something Brenda can talk about as well. But here you have these very racist, white supremacist families, wealthy families throughout the South, sending their daughters, their privileged daughters, to this camp in the North Georgia woods. It's the first private girls' camp in Georgia, and Lillian is openly admitting Jewish girls. Nobody was doing that at the time. She was bringing in children of color who lived nearby to play with the children and eat with the children, and that was something that was a taboo in the South. And so why would these fathers do this, knowing what was going on? And or their mothers, and one thought was that their parents wanted them to know this. They wanted to know that there was a different way of looking at society. Maybe they were hoping for the best. And Brenda, I'll let you add to that.
Well, I think one thing that I always go back to, Lillian Smith was a child of privilege herself. She was one of the youngest children in a large family, and up until she was a teenager, her father was quite wealthy, and she and her brothers and sisters lived in a very privileged world. But she gave great credit to her father. He ran his business like all other Southern businessmen did back then, and did very well. But she always sensed that he was trying, in her words, to give his children a sense of wholeness in spite of the divided world they had to learn to live in. She got a great deal. I think he was a man who understood the inequities of the world they lived in, but used them in order to make his way. Now, one thing she got out of that privileged upbringing was she could charm the bahuli out of people. She had all of that. And that's one of the things that I loved about playing her. Inside, she was just a radical, completely radical animal. But on the outside, she had all the charm in the world. And she could just sit down and talk to you the way we were brought up in the South and make you think that anything was a good idea if you just sit there and listen long enough. And I think the quality she spent much of the winter during the years she ran the camp, traveling all over the South, meeting with the parents and families of girls, talking to them in their homes about the camp and about what she would offer. And that, I mean, she recruited like a football coach. And I think that what she was able to do in sitting down in the living rooms of these people who wanted the best educations for their daughters, she could talk about the culture that they would be exposed to. Not only the horseback riding and the swimming and the archery and the typical things that a camp needed to offer, but they did dance, they did music, they did theater, They did creative writing. And I think she was able to paint a very attractive picture for these families who did want their daughters to have that kind of background when they went out into the world. And, you know, I'm not sure how many places around home they could get that. So she had a way of charming her way in and perhaps even reading what these families wanted. I had the pleasure of talking to several times with a woman who had been a camper at Miss Lil's camp back in the day. And she said her father made it very clear to her that Miss Lil's camp was one world. And when she was there, she was to embrace it fully. But when she came back home, she had to leave that behind. So they understood somehow, maybe again in Lillian Smith's words, what her father was trying to do, those fathers were trying to do, to give the children a sense of wholeness, but still understanding and making sure they understood the divided world they still had to come back and live in on practical terms. Vernon has his hand up.
Yes, in this regard, I'm wondering, has there been tracking of women who attended those camps? I mean, I can see a whole doctoral dissertation, for example, on did some of those women, for example, when they went on to college, become leaders in certain ways? Is there a lot of information that has already been gathered? Did you have an opportunity, Hal, or others, to interview any of these young women?
I asked that to Rose Gladney, and she had done some work on that, and she had gone and interviewed some of the daughters of those women. And maybe it's anecdotal, but a lot of the daughters of the women who went to the camp became professional women, became doctors and lawyers, and said that their mother talked about things that they learned at the camp. So we were getting the feeling like maybe the girls who went to the camp couldn't put the things into practice that they learned, but they could pass it on to their children. And it would be a great dissertation. I hope somebody does follow up on that.
We had that one evening, a young woman spoke who was doing, maybe it was a master's, but she was definitely researching and had been reading the letters and reaching out. Maybe it was to different camps in the area, but yes, it had caught the attention of at least one young student who was looking into researching more deeply.
And one story related to that, during the protests in Albany, when things were getting really heated, Lillian Smith wrote one of her campers, who is now a young woman in Albany, and asked her to see what she could do. And this young woman just flatly refused to intervene or interfere, just saying that she couldn't do it. You know, and
you're talking about in the 60s.
We're talking 60s.
Yeah. I think the universe in Laurel Falls was completely separate. That was a magical, separate place during the summer when those camps were in session. And you know, the camp did not survive the controversy around strange fruit. It was shortly after that the camp went away for good. And Henry, you brought up about the communism. It was her treatment of race is what torpedoed the camp, and of course torpedoed her artistic career too, as well. And I responded to her so much as she wanted so desperately, more than anything else, more than even to be seen as a champion of social justice in her heart. She said, what matters to me as Lillian Smith is poetry and music and art and literature. That's what matters to me. And, you know, a lot of that part of her was, I don't know, it couldn't coexist with also the level of her passionate activism in that time. Rosemary, your hand is up. Can you unmute her?
the idea of the dissertation or something along those lines around the campers, people who went, reminds me of another documentary that if you all haven't seen on another issue, I highly recommend, which is called Crip Camp. And it's really about a camp for people who are disabled in the 70s. And it's, you know, in the aftermath of Woodstock. And it's, and those campers who had all different kinds of disabilities and then had all sorts of freedom they'd never had before at camp, they are the group that established the grassroots activism for the disability rights and really together with the help of others make that happen. It's a documentary that's produced by Barack and Michelle Obama, among others. So it's just interesting to think, even though that's unlikely to have occurred in this instance, you know, the following of that kind of impact is, you know, worthy of further consideration, as Vernon pointed out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you say that was called Crip Camp? Did I hear that correctly?
Crip Camp, and you can see it on one of the platforms. I'm not sure which one of the. It's Netflix. It's a Netflix, and it's very, very interesting and inspiring, and also about events that occurred in the lifetime of most of us.
Yeah.
You know, that reminds me that, you know, when the 1954 Brown versus Board decision came down, Lillian Smith wrote an editorial about it, that the Atlanta Constitution wouldn't print, but the New York Times did print. And her whole focus was that this opens education to children with disabilities as well. It opens education to everyone who was previously denied admittance into the white schools. And, you know, from the 1950s on, she was writing about disabilities because she had been diagnosed with cancer in 53. And there were the atomic bombs that sort of haunted her imagination. So she was very in tune with that. And I think her manuscript may have been burned in the big fire of her cabin that she was working on with her partner, Paula Snelling, at the time.
And this film documentary does show the work that these activists engaged in. It was built on the activism of the civil rights movement and the women's movement and other kinds of civil rights types endeavors. It's really well done.
Okay.
I see another hand up, Lee Pascal.
Hi, Hal.
Hey, Lee.
As you know, I watched this movie quite a while ago, so I didn't watch it this past week. But I did watch last night the PBS American Experience on the vote and the fight for the 19th Amendment. So I was curious, was Lillian Smith involved in that movement, seeing as they said women fought for it for 70 years? Thank you.
Are you talking about
the right to vote?
In the 1920s?
Before
it went all the way, up to 1920.
Up to 1919.
Yeah.
Right, it was ratified 1920, so.
I don't know anything about that.
Was she in China? When was she in?
She went to China in 21, 22. She was in New York in 1920. She would have been there, but I don't really have much on that. Brenda, do you?
Well, I guess she was in college, and then she was at Peabody, and then she went to China. And I think she was a little young for that movement. I don't have her associated actively. If she had been 20 years older, she would have been in the front lines, carrying banners and kicking butt. You know, she would have been whatever. I wish we had her right now because I've got a long list of stuff I'd like to get her busy on. But I think she was a little, that was before her time.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Spencer King has a hand up.
Hey, Brenda.
Hey.
You know some of these things, but I'm it sort of reminded me that everybody, the stereotypical Southern successful people were all strongly against integration and so forth, and nobody would go to a camp like this and be, indoctrinated, and nobody would send their kids. It was a little bit of a unique story. My father was a Southern historian who looked like Robert E. Lee sometimes, but took me to Koinonia when I was a kid, when I was in the 50s. And we visited Vernon Jordan and all this kind of thing. And so there were these subversives within the Southern aristocracy that really were hoping for better days and working in those directions. So, and to illustrate this, I'll tell you that you're talking about Brown versus Board. My father got commissioned along with Coulter at Georgia to write the history book, Georgia history book for the schools. And they wrote it, and it came back in Gallic proof. And my father had written one chapter on Brown versus Board and its implication. And it was a junior high textbook, but it mentioned it, talked about it. That book, after he had reviewed the galley, went to the state textbook review board or something like that. When the book came out in print, that chapter had been taken out. It was totally removed from the book. And I always remembered how angry he was, and he couldn't do anything about it, and had to live for the next 20 years when they used this book, and that chapter was missing. There were a bit of there were people, there were a lot of different people in the South at that time, which is one of the problems I have trying to relate to, how we ought to be feeling about current movements, and being like Brenda, responsible for all these things and my ancestors. And then I think about all the people who are here in America that I work with every day, and almost none of them were born here. At Emory, we have, in medicine, the vast majority aren't born here. And I've never had a real in-depth conversation about them. But okay, now we talk about reparations and everything. Are you guys willing to ante up? I mean, I had ancestors who owned slaves. You may have been a slave some other country. What's your attitude towards this? I don't know. We all have become Americans, but I wonder in our backgrounds if we have different ideas and different feelings of guilt and so forth. Anyway, just a bit of a ramble, but
no.
Thank you for showing this. I have not seen the movie yet. I'm going to look at it as soon as we get off.
Liza, your hand is up.
I was going to say, and to follow up on Spencer's comment, my father was also a Southern historian. His first job was at Auburn in 1963. My name is Davis, and we have some kind of shirt-tail relationship to Jefferson Davis, of which I'm not very proud, not proud at all, but he wanted to go to join the Selma March along with two colleagues, and was told point blank that he would lose his job. So I wanted just to add what that was like being in Auburn in the 60s. And I wanted to ask Hal and his son, Henry, about the inclusion of the snippet about Faulkner. And I wondered just how much Faulkner might have known about Lillian and how much she might have read of his. Was there anything in her letters? Brenda, maybe you can help answer that would have indicated her response to his works. But I was very interested that he wouldn't go where she would go in terms of trying to enter the imagination of an African American.
Well, that raises a couple of issues, interesting issues. One, she thought she was a better writer than Faulkner. And you know, that says something about how she saw herself and her ego. She called him a finger painter who was trying to dabble with words like an expressionist painter. So when he gets the Nobel Prize, what, in 49, I think she thought it should have come to her, you know, at some point. And the other issue is he was a moderate, like a lot of other white Southern males at the time, including Ralph McGill, Harding Carter. They were all saying, let's go slow, we'll solve this down the road. And she and Martin Luther King Jr. had no patience with moderates. They saw a moral wrong that needed to be corrected now, not 50 years later. And so she didn't have much respect for Faulkner, and she didn't appreciate the fact that Faulkner and McGill and Harding Carter, they were getting all the attention. They became like the official spokesperson for the South, while her voice was being silenced. That grated on her until she died, the fact that her voice was being left out of that conversation. That's why we thought it was important to use that snippet from the Today Show, in which she's being asked about what is it like, what is integration like, what do you Southerners feel like in the South? And that was probably the last time she was ever really included in that sort of national conversation. Brenda, do you have something to add to that about?
No, I mean, Lillian, yeah, you were either all in or she didn't want to waste time with you. And yes, she was not for the moderate view. And yes, I think, unfortunately, she suffered a great deal from the feeling of her work not being appreciated as it should have been. And, you know, but it had to do with things other than the writing itself. It had to do with the content at the time, which was not acceptable. I see another hand, John Sitter.
Hi, yes. Sorry. Hi, and thanks. Thanks for the wonderful film. This question has maybe just been answered. I was surprised, having been to college with a liberal Southern roommate for whom Ralph McGill was kind of a hero, that to the vehemence of his review of her work. But, and I was going to ask if that was personal or ideological. It sounds more like the latter. Is that right?
I think it was personal. She took it personally. She felt like those attacks weren't justified, and that he felt very threatened by her. And it could be that he was, I think she felt like her womanhood was being attacked or being or put down by McGill. McGill becomes the savior of the white voice in the South only after 1954 and the Brown decision, whereas Lillian Smith started in the 1930s, in the mid-30s, writing about it. Her literary journal that she co-edited with Paula Snelling, started in 35, I think, or 36, was the first white publication to incorporate the work of Black writers and artists. So when McGill starts getting all the attention in the late 50s after, you know, that savage review of Killers of the Dream, she just felt like he was attacking her personally and not giving her respect as a writer, as an intellectual, and as a woman.
The Jack Tarver review was savage, and the woman was vilified, personally vilified and insulted in the Atlanta Constitution in ways that we would find unacceptable now.
It wasn't until Gene Patterson came along later in the mid 60s that they had a nice understanding relationship, and he started printing her editorial letters at that point. And she liked Gene Patterson, but didn't have much respect for McGill, which is interesting. I would like to know more about that as well.
Okay, Larry Vogler.
Yes, Hal, you mentioned that she realized that she really didn't have the musical talent that she thought she was her future, and yet she went to Peabody nevertheless. And I was wondering Could you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Well, there's a nice story that she writes about how she had a concert performance and totally froze up during her performance, could not remember a single note. And I think that was like her moment of deciding she was not cut out for a musical career at that point, and she wasn't happy just being an accompanist. It's interesting that her love of music probably went into her love of writing and her abilities as a writer later on. I think there was another Southern writer who also studied music and before becoming a writer, and I'm kind of blanking on who that was, but I think maybe that musical career was more of an acceptable path for young Southern women at the time. Brenda, do you know more?
No, she was a passionate attacker of whatever she became interested in. We know she was passionate about her social justice, but she, as a young woman, when they were still living in Clayton, she had decided that religion was no longer giving her the proper answers because she couldn't get anything clear out of her Sunday school teacher. So she decided she would find the answers elsewhere. She read every book off every shelf she could find, read everything she had access to. The answers weren't there. So then she jumped into music. She started playing the piano and playing all of the great composers, and decided that that was where she would find the meaning of life. And when she went off to Peabody, she did realize that most everybody there was far more talented than she was. And as she said herself, her parents and the people around her had given her far more credit for her talent. And she was encouraged by them, but she got out in the world and realized that it didn't match up. But what it all had to do with was her passion for finding the answers to life, for knowing that there was a bigger, larger world out there, and she wasn't afraid to go after it. She wasn't afraid to get answers, seek answers, and not have to know what they would be. Where so much of the world that she had grown up in and was there, it was about, I don't know, growing up in the South myself, it was about figuring out what appropriate behavior was and then conforming to it. And that's the way you made your way. There were limits, and if you stayed within those limits, you did just fine. I guess it's still like that in a lot of ways, but she was never satisfied with that. So yeah, music, that was one of her ways.
And it's music that takes her to China, where she's a music teacher for 3 years, where she really sees segregation and racism in a totally new light. Mm-hmm. So that's what she says. I mean, the way she writes that story about herself, and then comes back and sees the South in a whole different viewpoint.
Yeah, that trip to China was absolutely one of the most important things in her life. As far as, all right, Vernon, I see your hand up.
Yes. Could you tell us more about Paula Snelling? It seems very interesting to me that somehow Paula was attracted to that passion that Brenda is talking about, or understood it, or somehow nurtured it, because it's obvious that Lillian just fell completely, as she said, in love with Paula. So can you tell us about Paula's earlier life till she met Lillian?
Ooh, that's not, I've seen a scrapbook that Paula left to the Hargett Library at University of Georgia. I really don't have much information about her, except from what we've gained, from Lillian Smith. We have some of their letters, and I know Brenda can talk about this, but Paula was very intelligent. She was a great writer, more of an academic writer probably than Lillian when you start reading some of her essays. And she was the horseback instructor at the summer camp, and I think she taught math in Macon, at maybe the high school in Macon during winter.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because that relationship, you know, it was kept secret then. Some love letters were supposed to be burned, but they survived. And Paula Snelling gave them to the biographer editor, Rose Gladney, and talked a little bit about their relationship, and it was interesting to me making the film about how much of that to bring into the film, how much of that personal life. And I asked everybody I talked with how important was this relationship to Lillian Smith's life and her career, and everybody said it was very important, that we needed to delve into it a little bit. But we don't know much about Paula Snelling's life previously. Brenda?
Well, Paula had been hired by Lillian's father while Lillian was still in China. And when he was ill and needed Lillian to come home from China, that's why she left China. Paula was there and stayed because Lillian had to come and start running the camp. And they had an immediate affinity, and Lillian was already beginning to do a bit of writing, and she would ask Paula, because Paula was educated and interested in writing and poetry, to read what she had written. And Paula was both helpfully critical and also very encouraging. Now, Lillian, I talked about the passion. She had some passionate romances, especially with boys from Johns Hopkins when she was up in Baltimore, with men. But when she developed and her relationship with Paula Snelling as it grew, she finally ended up describing as, she said, Paula was the first person in my life who appealed to both my mind and my heart simultaneously. And she found her perfect match in Paula. And Paula, many years later after Lillian died, told Rose Gladney that Paula had always been identifiably gay. She saw herself as that. Lillian was not, but she fell in love with Paula. So it was a wonderful, wonderful relationship. And I think Paula was Lillian said she would not have continued writing. She would have quit trying to write if she had not had the early encouragement that she got from Paula.
Yeah, you might have just more or less answered what I was also going to ask about, the extent to which Lillian Smith was open about her sexuality, and whether people sort of generally understood her as living a lesbian life, whether she was ever activist on behalf of what we now call LGBT issues, freedom to love whom one loves and all of that, or whether that was all sort of personal and not public, and what she had to say, what she promoted in her writing.
My sense of it, there was more personal, don't you think, Hal? And private?
Yeah, I think people understood it when they came to visit her on Screamer Mountain and saw them together. I think Eleanor Roosevelt probably knew. She once wrote Lillian Smith asking for help with someone who was incarcerated because of related to their homosexuality, and asked if Lillian Smith knew anybody or who could do anything. And Lillian Smith writes back and said, it's a terrible situation, but if we add this issue to the issues that we're trying to solve here, we'll never get anything done. And then she said she would refer it to her brother, who was working with the mental health organization of Georgia. So, and if you read her writings, you see a couple of references to gay issues, and you see a lot of conflicting points there that just makes, if you read Strange Fruit, you wonder how she was working this through in her own way about these issues and the way the characters were approaching it. And if you read 1 Hour, the novel she wrote in 1959, it also gets into that same territory. It seemed like it was very complicated to her. And like I said before, there was a young activist from Atlanta who tried to talk to her about that, and she just would not reveal anything about it. So if she had lived 10 more years into the 70s, I bet she's going to be upfront about that.
Absolutely.
You know, and with the Now movement, I think she would have been recognized as one of the leaders.
My guess is too, she was probably wise enough to recognize that if she became very vocal and public about gay rights or whatever how it might have been referred to at that time, that could have further compromised her fight for integration and for social justice between black and white. That would have given the world one more weapon to use against her. Yeah. And that would have been a very formidable weapon in that time because, you know, and I think also in the South in those days, it was not at all unusual for two maiden ladies to share a home. And it was sort of a don't ask, don't tell world. Mm-hmm. And two maiden ladies could share a home and be considered perfectly respectable as long as nobody asked any questions. And, you know, you could get into really, really bad trouble if you didn't just say, okay, don't ask, don't tell. But boy, they had each other, and it was fantastic. It was a remarkable relationship.
Yeah, it was good to find out that they were such loving partners for so long. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned just then attacks upon her occasioned by her positions on integration. Are things like the burnings that you've mentioned, the burning that destroyed manuscripts and so on, were those considered arsons? Were those attacks, in fact, actual physical attacks upon the property?
Well, it was a couple of juvenile delinquents who lived in the area who broke into her cabin while she was away and set fire to the cabin. And I think she gave them the benefit of the doubt, but also thought that it happened after 1954 when she was very vocal about the Supreme Court decision, among other things, and that maybe they heard adults talking and decided to take it on themselves. She didn't press charges. The families took the boys out of the county, you know, and but she lost over 13,000 letters. She lost 2 or 3 novellas, a manuscript, and process. And it took her years to recover from that.
I think one of the most hurtful losses to me is that she had written her first novel was a full manuscript on her period of time in China, which was so important to her, and that entire manuscript was lost. There was only one copy of it, and that loss is just incalculable.
You know, and during this time, she's getting bomb threats from the Klan. She's getting phone calls. The FBI is called in to investigate. This is something we didn't go very deeply into the documentary, and people have wondered why, but we felt like we had time constraints, and so many people in the South lived with those sort of threats. It just wasn't anything abnormal if you were going to speak out, that you were going to get those harassing phone calls, you were going to get threats from the Klan. And fortunately, she lived on top of a mountain. It takes, it's about a mile up to her house. It would be tough to get up there and back, I think. And people looked out for her in that little town of Clayton. So if she was going to speak out, she found a good place to speak out from, I think, on top of Screamer Mountain in North Georgia.
Mm.
Yes. Okay. Now, Larry, your hand.
Yes. I have a question for Henry. So I really enjoyed the aerial view along the river and sharp contrasted black and white scene, and I was wondering if you could tell us how you did that or how you constructed it.
Sure. Yeah, that's on the Swanee River down near Jasper, Florida, her home place of birth. And it was a good reason to go for a 2-day paddle on the Swanee, and bring along some camera equipment and a drone as well. And so the second morning I was there, that there's a kind of fine mist around, and so flew the drone and just kind of tracked up and down the river like that. And it's something I guess we've kind of learned, me and my dad kind of learning film together, kind of on the same track, really over the last maybe 8 to 10 years. We kind of started from scratch and have just kind of been learning as we go. And so this was one of those nice moments where I didn't really have the intention in mind of a nice kind of title opening sequence shot, but found it kind of after the fact, weeks after that paddle trip and getting all the footage, and then sitting down with, like my dad said, about 100 hours of footage, of not just B-roll, but all the other stuff, but then condensing it down to 50 good minutes. It was a fun, long process.
Can you talk about the music as well, the music choices, because people often ask about that?
Yeah, and it was a great opportunity to highlight some artists that I'm a big fan of and whose work I thought would fit well, especially the artist, the singer-songwriter whose song we used for the trailer, Maggie Kerner, who's a singer out of New Orleans, and the song fit perfectly. And it was nice too, in the trailer it featured 2 songs, and the other of which was recorded. I live here in LaGrange, Georgia, and I had attended LaGrange College as a history major, but also with the interest in music. So I was able to use some of those ties to the music department to set up a recording session with some local musicians here from LaGrange, including this great keyboardist, Lloyd Buchanan, who's great musician. And so we got to sit in the studio with him and 2 other musicians and record a few tracks that we got to use for the film. And then I know a number of other, it was fun just to be able to pick out a song for each little sequence of the film that fit just right. And it was really nice to do it with artists that we know or have some connection to. So a good opportunity. And it kind of felt like those artists then were able to share the film, I guess, with their followers, or, but a nice way to kind of spread to create a bigger audience. Good question.
Brenda, are you seeing that iPad 10 has been trying to speak? I don't know who that is, but it's iPad 10. They've been raising their hand for the last.
I don't see it. It's not on my.
Yeah, they evidently can't raise their hand. Don't know how.
Okay, well, should we let? Well, I have Gretchen's hand, and then iPad 10 is not showing. So
maybe
on what I've got,
who that is, and maybe you can change the name.
We know who that is.
Mine is just a quick one, and then we can seek out iPod Canon. So this follow-up for Henry, I did want to ask about the ILA artist, musician, and I'm going to say his name wrong, but I think it's Fahama Peku. Am I saying it something like right? And I think he did it sounded like a kind of rap version of Strange Fruit. Does that make sense to you? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, I was waiting for Billie Holiday, but then I heard him, and I think he was identified as the one making that kind of rap-like version of a Strange Fruit.
Actually, I made that connection with Fahamu.
Oh, okay.
After we did his work was at the Carlos.
His artwork.
His artwork.
Yeah, I know he's a genius. Yeah.
And I met him doing a video over there talking about his work. And then I saw this video that he had made, and he had used that song. And you're right, it's a rap version of Strange Fruit.
Well, it's not exactly the lyrics, but he says strange. He uses the phrase.
Right.
Different lyrics.
Maybe I can find it on Google.
Well, definitely he says strange fruit in the lyrics, but just
You can find his video of it. And since we can't afford the rights, we learned a lot about licensing music, and we could never afford the Billie Holiday version. We also wanted the Nina Simone song about Mississippi, which we also couldn't afford.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
It was good for, it was important for us to find local artists, and Fahamu agreed. And there's a fantastic bass player, he's a cello player, Corey Johnson. He's also featured on that track. But I love that song. I love the way it brings in a modern sensibility to Fruit at that moment.
Yeah, and by the way, okay. I did just want to say I'm glad you decided to add the epilogue from George Yancey, that material. Was that a last minute decision to do that?
It sort of was. We got some feedback before going to Portland to show it from Lillian Smith's niece, her great niece. And she was saying, can you add something before the Q&A to bring it up to date, to give people, to launch people into a conversation about the message. And so we went back and added the epilogue at the very, very end. A lot of people might miss it because it's after the credit. Yeah. But that really did spark, it brought the energy back into the room about why Lillian Smith is so important and how she's still talking to us today. And we also ended with the Lonnie King talk about the importance of voting. I'm
so glad you got to him before he died.
Yeah, I am too. That was, I didn't know he had that connection with her that he did. We just started talking. I knew that he knew of her, but I didn't realize he had gone to visit her and felt so strongly about her. We tried to talk to John Lewis, but just couldn't get on his because John Lewis also was one of the activists from Atlanta who went to visit her a few times.
Oh, yeah.
Along with Julian Bond. She really liked Julian Bond a lot. She thought he was the poet. He was, and when he was, there was that whole incident where he wasn't admitted to the Georgia House because whatever anti-Vietnam feeling. She wrote a strong editorial about him that Jean Patterson decided to run in the paper, which right before her death, actually, a couple of months before she died. So, yeah. Yeah, there are all these threads running through this. The whole thing about her being in the car with Martin Luther King Jr. when he was pulled over.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
I mean, I kept coming across these things. It's like a Zelig kind of thing where she's like involved in all these little things that you had no idea. She would just pop up.
I just have to say, Brenda and Hal, as somebody who grew up here in Raven County, knew Lillian Smith, that I cannot express to you enough thanks for what you're doing and how you have taken Lillian Smith and given her to so many people that needed to hear about her. It's truly amazing. And also, I'm very appreciative of what Piedmont College is doing. And Matthew Tooch, who's the head of the Lillian Smith Center for the Arts. I don't know if you all have come across his Bitter Southerner piece about dope with lime. That's worth hearing about. There's just so much to say about her, but the one thing I would like most to say is that a 2-hour drive from Atlanta and you're here in Raven County, The Lillian Smith Center is wonderful to visit, to see where she is buried, to see the chimney. We're putting in a moss garden right in there. And if you got in touch with me, I'd be happy to let you in to see her library where she and Paula did so much of their work, and the cabin where she wrote. It's just an invitation that I would love to extend to you.
Nanette, is there a way to get, like, are there hours or days or whatever that you could?
Unfortunately, no, Brenda.
We're retired. Therefore, any time goes.
So
no, I mean, as far as the center is concerned, if you got in touch with Matthew Tooch, I'm sure he would arrange that. There is a website, the Lillian E. Smith Center, and right now there are probably a couple of residents up there doing their work, either writing, composing music, making whatever art they do. And Brenda, you know the place because you bravely stayed up there for 2 or 3 days when nobody else was up there, and I think it's pretty primitive, but I hope it was a good experience for you and Kiri.
Well, I want to tell everybody it was a gift to be there. This lady who's talking, Nanette, is the person who made the connection. When I think when Nancy Fichter was looking for someone to do something with Lillian Smith, Nanette knew me and she introduced me to Nancy, and that's how I got started on this remarkable decade of my life. My 70s have been lived hand in glove with Lillian Smith, and
it shows.
It's like to get a gift like that on this end of life is remarkable. And it is true that once the camp closed down for the summer, the resident artists went away. My husband and I did stay in a cabin up there on Screamer Mountain for, it was several days. And that was the darkest, loneliest place in the world, if that's not anybody else there. And it was a remarkable thing to sit in those rooms and walk on those paths and just live in Lillian Smith's space. And I would recommend to anyone to go up there. It's a brilliant experience to have. And Nanette herself has been essential in helping keep all of this alive and keep it going.
Only because I love Lillian Smith.
I know you did. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Patty Owen Smith has her hand up.
Yes.
There she is.
Here I am. There's so many questions I wanted to ask, but I'll ask this one of Hal. First of all, thank you, Hal, for a wonderful, wonderful documentary. Several times you've mentioned and others have mentioned the question that is raised up with Lillian Smith, and that's why didn't I know about her? I'm not sure I have heard an answer to that question. I was an English major in the late 60s at the University of Georgia, took a course on Southern writers. I knew nothing about Lillian Smith. And I read Subversive Writers. So I'm just wondering if you can address that again. If you may have already addressed it, but I didn't hear it.
No, well, I asked that to about everybody, all the English professors I talked with. And basically the answer is there's only so much room in the canon for Southern authors. You've got room for 4 or 5, and that's all you have time for in most of the Southern literature classes. She's brought in more for Southern history, Southern politics, and increasingly, and maybe in gender studies, if you're looking at Southern women. But I think there's so many different variables. I think it comes down to she's more complicated than most of the Southern writers that fit nicely into a niche, like Harper Lee. I think if you take Harper Lee out of the equation and you put Flannery O'Connor down just a notch, maybe you have a little more room for Lillian Smith. Maybe Faulkner, you kind of nudge over a little bit. I think maybe you know, maybe the times that we're going through will find Lillian Smith and raise her up. I think as her voice is needed by younger, you know, students, academics. So I think it's a matter of time, and we'll just have to see what happens. But if you read her work, you realize she wasn't working on these little simple solutions to things, and maybe she was preaching a little too much, you know, maybe that dilutes her importance to a lot of literary scholars. The fact that she mixed in her memoir with nonfiction and Freudian analysis, maybe that's a little strong. Maybe Strange Fruit is a little too much of too convoluted for some people, and maybe too simple in some respects. But I think people need to read her based on her life story and see how much of her life and thinking went into her work to really appreciate what she was doing.
Well, she was actively suppressed by newspapers and everybody. I mean, it was an active campaign. Newspapers stopped reviewing her books. People wouldn't sell them in stores. She was very, very actively suppressed. And if you ever doubt that, please do read the editorial by Jack Tarver that appeared in the Atlanta Constitution, and you will know what this lady was up against. And it's not pretty.
It's true. Can I just have a quick second question? And that's about her biographers. Is Anne Loveland the only biographer for Lillian Smith? And did you draw from that at all?
I think there were several other attempts, but as of now, she's the only biographer, and she's one of those biographers who didn't do her a favor at all. She even puts down Lillian Smith's literary contributions at the end. I have a quote. I mean, it really struck me how harsh her judgment was about how derivative she was, and I would have to find the quote, but she focused more on her activism than her creative and literary work, which probably, that came out in the 80s, I believe. That couldn't have helped her standing at all in the academy.
Yeah. 1980.
My own research was all from original sources at the Hargret collection and from things that her niece shared with me.
Thank you.
Now we had another hand up, and that is Marianne Skeen.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, this is just a quick follow-up question on why nobody knows about Lillian Smith, and how I wonder, you said you were trying to reach younger people, and I wonder what your vision is for getting this maybe more into the academy, especially now that there's more remote learning. It seems like a good opportunity, say, for literature classes to be able to use this documentary, and how do you see that unfolding?
That's exactly what we're hoping for. We've been scheduling screenings, and it fits in well with the classroom, especially at this 52-minute mark. And in the fall, we hope to have it online. We're just not sure what platform yet, whether it be Amazon or Vimeo or somewhere that we can make it more accessible. But we're just relying on word of mouth at this point, sort of in our own grassroots, three-person job kind of way of trying to reach people. We have about 10 more of these virtual screenings and Zoom talks before the fall. So we would love for you to be able to spread the word too. I think if we can get faculty to use it in the classroom, I think it would be tremendous. That's all we can, I mean, we would love that. That's the whole purpose of this. I think it is geared more to maybe an academic audience as it is. So, we have to tell you, I mentioned this book earlier, Lillian Smith Reader, UGA Press, 2016, but it just became like our Bible for doing the documentary. It reveals so much about her through her letters and excerpts of her works and everything. So anyone interested.
It's definitely, if you have to start someplace with her reading and as far as giving an overview, this is the place to start.
And we don't make any money off the sales of that book. So. I think, are we winding down? Should we take like one more question?
If there are any hands up. I don't see any hands up right now. Anybody else got any questions or comments you want to make? I don't have any little blue hands waving right now.
Well, we appreciate spending time with everybody. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, Hal, and thank you to your son, Henry, and thank you to Brenda. It has been a really wonderful experience for all of us. And as our tradition now, I'll leave the meeting open and people can unmute themselves. They can put themselves in gallery view and chat with one another. You can continue the conversation about the documentary as well. So thank you again to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that discussion was just wonderful after seeing the film. I mean, so many experts, at least 3 or 4, you wouldn't find anywhere else. It's great.
I guess my hand was never seen, Brenda. I just want to add my voice. This is Don Salyers.
Well, Don, you're on some kind of weird machine up there, wherever you are.
Oh, machine. Okay.
It's like iPhone 10 didn't show up. I have a special list of hands.
Oh, okay.
Did not show up on my special list.
Sorry about that. I wanted an intertextual comment on Baldwin, because a lot of us have been reading Baldwin. I've kind of immersed myself in that, and that connection is really worth exploring. It's not so much a question as a comment, because Baldwin talks about doing the impossible. That's what we're called to do. And it seems to me that Lillian Smith, given all the details of her literally persecution, was doing the impossible. And that's why this is so important, Hal. We're so indebted to you, and of course to Brenda over many, many years. So thank you, Hal. But that connection with Baldwin and the fact that many, many people are now rereading and rediscovering Baldwin, and that connection with Lillian is really worth exploring, I think.
And George Yancey in the documentary mentions that quote.
Yeah.
About she was doing the impossible, and it just like finding the Baldwin quote. He was talking with Studs Terkel about Lillian Smith. And to me, that also confirmed her importance as much as anyone else did. The fact that he saw her and what she had gone through to put the word out.
Yeah. Interesting to compare her time in China with Baldwin's time in France. Very, very different responses. And as Brenda says, that China trip, as you well know, must have been extraordinarily formative. And had a lot of transitivity down the line. Baldwin leaves us in a kind of colloidal suspension. But of course, that was one of his specialties, I think, the subtlety of his psychological appropriation of France and being there. Anyway, thank you.
I would have loved to have seen a conversation between Baldwin and Lillian Smith.
Yeah.
I wonder what that would have been like.
Absolutely, yeah. But we've got to carry that on then. That's our responsibility now, to carry on the Baldwin-Smith conversation that didn't happen. Yeah. I've got to run. Thank you so much for that. It's so splendid. Yeah, thank you.
You're here, Don. Is Catherine King still here? Catherine, okay, she's already signed off. Oh, no, Catherine Mitchell. Hey, I just wanted to thank Catherine Mitchell because I think she brought the idea of the screening up to the Emeritus College.
Yes, she did.
I really
was the one.
So, I should have mentioned that sooner.
All I did was present a great idea, and you were the one who really had the idea. So thank you.
We were all over that as soon as you wrote.
Well, we're going to sign off. We're going to go to Aldi's and do our weekly shopping trip.
Just wear your mask, you know, too.
Wear your mask.
We'll wear
mask. Okay.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thank Henry, too.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Nanette.
Yes.
I need, you still have the same email and all that stuff? I would like to be in touch with you.
Yes, it is the same. And Brenda, seeing you with this long hair, this is an experience.
Well,
Diane, on the other hand, you look like you've been to the barber.
I cut my own hair.
Oh boy.
I use the clippers.
Like I said, I ordered this plastic tinkle comb from Amazon with a razor blade in it, and I just kind of hack away. When it's in my eyes, I hack away. So, you know, whatever. I give myself a very big tip, too.
Oh, is that Ron Gould I see?
Yes, it is. How you doing?
I'm good. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it has. So we miss all our Emory folks. So
Nanette, you and Christopher ought to be on this every week. You could, you know.
Well, yeah, Christopher pulled me into this CASA thing. We're court-appointed special advocates for kids, and honestly, I had no idea it would take so much time. But anyway, that's what's drawing our attention right now.
Yeah,
Nanette, we actually had Ron give a talk, 2 weeks ago, Ron? It was a wonderful talk about a weird genius mathematician called Paul Erdos. It was but the thing is, we have a recording of it, and I don't know if it's up online yet.
It's not up.
I want to see it.
Yeah, and all you'll need to do is just go to the Emeritus College website and click, and there it will be. It was very
great.
entertaining.
Yeah,
you got to see it. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah.
Hey, Gray, you got to put Nanette and Christopher on the mailing list for our colloquia, okay?
And the newsletter, too, if it's not going to them already.
Are we getting the newsletter?
The Emeritus College, yeah,
See,
yeah, we get it.
Okay, so if you get it,
I just don't show it to Nanette.
Yeah, send it to
I
them.
hide it from her.
Well, you may want to join as many as we can entice to join us to see the whole first act of Hamlet enacted by people you will know this coming Monday, 11:30 to 1.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. This is a great day.